Do you know the feeling when an unrealistically cool idea comes to mind and you start thinking about it for a long time? But then when you tell another person about this idea, they look at you as inadequate. Unfortunately, my wife came up with an idea that could potentially destroy our marriage, and she brought it to life. I realized that my marriage could not be saved. I was at our mailbox at the end of the driveway checking for mail when a red BMW drove by and pulled into the neighbor's driveway. As it approached their garage, the door opened to let the car in before closing again. It seemed strange. I knew Kyle Good was out of town. Why would someone be parking in their garage? There could be many innocent reasons, like a cousin or maybe Doris's brother. Who knew? And it certainly wasn't any of my business. I quickly forgot about the incident when I noticed a letter in the mailbox from my sister, who lives in Florida. Gina always writes great letters, full of family news and plenty of articles cut out from the numerous publications she subscribes to. The following morning, as I was pulling out of my driveway to go to work, a BMW sped past me so quickly that I had to hit the brakes to avoid backing into it. I probably would have ignored the whole incident if my wife Jenny and I hadn't stopped by the Goods house on Friday night while we were walking the dog. The red BMW was parked on the street, and Kyle Good was standing on his porch talking to the guy I had seen driving the car earlier that week. Kyle and the guy approached us as we continued down the sidewalk. "George, Jenny? Hello?" Jenny and I stopped as the two men reached the sidewalk. "George, I'd like you to meet my best friend, Harry Thompson. Harry, this is our neighbor, George." I shook Harry's hand and then introduced him to Jenny. "This is my wife, Jenny." I wasn't surprised when Harry, after letting go of my hand, took Jenny's and looked at her like she was a dessert. When you're married to a woman as attractive as Jenny, you get used to men drooling over her. But this guy had a look on his face that I couldn't quite place, maybe a smirk, like he knew something I didn't. Now that I knew Harry was Kyle's best friend and not a relative, my mind started racing as to why he spent the night while Kyle was out of town. Was something going on between Harry and Kyle's wife, Doris? Personally, I can't think of anything worse than a best friend who sleeps with his buddy's wife. But maybe there was an innocent explanation, like he was in town on business and needed a place to stay. So I asked, "Harry, where do you live?" Harry replied, "Over across the river in St. Paul." So that ruled out any need for him to stay over as he lived close by. That left. Harry was still eyeing Jenny like he was ready to pounce, so I said we had to finish walking the dog and said goodbye to Kyle and Harry. This left me with a dilemma. Should I say something to Kyle? Part of me wanted to stay out of it, but another part recognized that Kyle had become a friend since Jenny and I moved into the neighborhood 7 months ago. If I were in his shoes, I'd want to know if my wife was cheating. By Sunday, I had made up my mind. While Kyle was mowing his lawn, I walked over to talk to him. After some small talk, I got straight to the point. "Kyle, on Monday night, when you were out of town, your best friend Harry spent the night at your place." Kyle's reaction floored me. He actually chuckled and said, "George, of course he did. I bet he gave Doris the time of her life." I was speechless, my mouth hanging open. Kyle kept laughing as he explained, "George, I thought you knew. Doris and I have an open relationship." It took me a moment to process this. "You mean you both sleep with other people?" "More than that, we swing. Haven't you noticed the car's here every other month? It's when we host." "Host?" Kyle seemed amused by my discomfort. "Yes, George, host. As in 6 or more couples and fortunate singles like Harry come over and we all swap partners. We sleep with each other's wives." I still hadn't formulated a coherent response to Kyle's news when he asked the inevitable question. "Would you and Jenny like to join us? We're always looking for new recruits. Doris and I would be considered aces if we brought the two of you on board." That question snapped me out of my stupor. "No, Kyle. There's no way we'd participate in anything like that. As I turned to leave, I heard Kyle call out to me, "Pity." The fact is that recently the topic of free extramarital affairs has been raised not for the first time. 3 or 4 months ago, Jenny and I were recovering from intimacy when she brought up the subject. Jenny asked, "George, what are you dreaming about?" I pondered this question while my heartbeat and breathing slowly returned to normal. "I'd like to make love to you on the beach. I know that fantasy is better than reality. It just won't be nice if the sand gets somewhere. But the idea sounds funny." It was clear that Jenny was not satisfied with my answer, so she asked again, "Anything else?" I hesitated to talk about it, but decided to take the plunge. "Promise you won't think I'm crazy if I tell you?" Jenny propped herself up on one elbow and turned to face me. "I promise, George. What's the matter?" "Remember, you promised. I would like you to dress really provocatively, high heels, a little black dress. I would like you to go to the hotel bar without me. I want you to sit at the bar on a high stool so that your long legs can be seen from under this little black dress. Then, I'd come in pretending I didn't know you. I'd buy you a drink. We'd chat until you had a drink. And then I'd take you out for all to see. I would take you to a reserved room and we would be busy with each other for hours." She asked, "What if one of the guys at the bar tries to buy me a drink or hook me up?" "You'll ignore them, of course." Jenny continued to insist. "Wouldn't you like to see me flirting with some guy before you take me away? Wouldn't you like that?" "Definitely not. In my fantasies, you could dress provocatively in public, but without frills." "Have you ever thought about spending time with another couple or even multiple couples?" Jenny's question made an unexpected impression on me. "Jenny, I have no desire to be intimate with any other woman, and I certainly don't want to watch you do it with another man. Why are you asking? Is this what you dream of?" Jenny hastened to answer, considering my fading desire. "No, George, I just asked because a lot of couples have this fantasy. I was curious if this was one of your fantasies." Jenny ended the conversation and brought me pleasure. Soon after, I fell asleep, forgetting about talking about fantasies. It wasn't until a few months later, when I was telling Jenny about the Goodies parties, that I remembered her previous question. "Have you ever thought about spending time with another couple?" After I left Kyle that afternoon, I walked back to our house and found Jenny outside sunbathing in a skimpy bikini. I grabbed a beer from the fridge and sat down next to her on the patio. "Jenny, did you know the Goods are swingers and that they host parties with other swingers?" Jenny's reaction was telling. She usually pulls her sunglasses up to her head so the person she's talking to can see her blue eyes. Her father taught her and her siblings to remove their sunglasses when conversing with others. He even told me to do the same because he found it distrustful to talk to someone with shaded eyes. So I grew suspicious when Jenny responded without taking off her sunglasses. "Why no, George? Where did you get that idea?" "From Kyle. He just said it outright. I mentioned that Harry had spent Monday night at his house while he was traveling. He shrugged it off, saying Doris and he have an open relationship and that they swing and host swinger parties. Well, I don't see how that's any of our business. I can't believe you told Kyle about Doris. Why would you do that?" "Jenny, if you were cheating on me, I'd want a true friend to inform me." "It's still snitching. I thought all boys were taught not to be tattletales when they were growing up." "It depends on how serious the matter is. You don't snitch on minor stuff. But if it's significant, then—" Jenny cut me off. "And what's the big deal if Doris is cheating? Who is she hurting?" Without much thought, I replied, "Jenny, you make it sound like adultery is a minor thing. For many marriages, it's a deal breaker. Most people struggle with their spouse's infidelity." I was shocked by Jenny's response. "Well, that's just stupid. It's just intimacy." I was still in shock and silent when Jenny ended the conversation. "George, whatever the Goods do is their business, not ours. As long as we love and trust each other and stay true to our vows, we shouldn't argue about this." Come here and kiss me. It's been hours since you last kissed me." I kissed Jenny, but there was something bothering me about our conversation. Something I'd think about more when I wasn't distracted by Jenny's tight body in that red bikini. Over the following weeks, I began observing Jenny more attentively. Despite our daily routine seeming entirely normal, I couldn't shake a growing suspicion. Our intimate life showed no signs of strain, still robust with encounters 3 or 4 times a week, and weekend escapades that left me thoroughly satisfied, sometimes lasting for hours. There were hardly any external cues to justify my unease except for 2 anomalies. One day, when I tried to look up a contact on Jenny's phone, it was unexpectedly locked. This was a new behavior. Jenny had always found unlocking her phone inconvenient and had never secured it before. Secondly, I noticed she started clearing the browsing history on our computer, a departure from her usual habits. These changes seemed trivial at first, but as the saying goes, from small things, big things one day come. Neither of these obstacles proved insurmountable. Overcoming my apprehension about invading Jenny's privacy, I installed a program on our computer to discreetly log its activity. Despite her efforts to erase the history, the computer continued to store it in a file I could access. Cracking Jenny's phone password wasn't particularly challenging. I casually returned her phone, asking for her brother's number, without mentioning its locked status. Unaware that she was in view of a mirror, Jenny unlocked her phone, giving me the opportunity to record the mirrored image with my own phone while she searched for Matt's number. The web pages that Jenny visited in the following weeks were intriguing. She read adult stories. Whenever possible, I checked the messages on Jenny's phone. For several weeks, everything seemed normal. No suspicious messages or calls to anyone who might turn out to be a potential lover. The situation changed immediately after I mentioned my upcoming business trip, during which I had to leave the city for a week and a half. My job as a translator often required such trips every 2 months, and the staff switched places to spread the load. 2 days after I shared the news, during which Jenny seemed very upset about my prolonged absence, I found a message from Doris on her phone. "We agreed on Saturday, at the last minute, but 5 couples have confirmed that you will be here again, and you know how excited Kyle and Harry are. See you then." I was so furious that I could barely think straight. My wife, pretending to be upset, was actually waiting for my departure to go have fun. The mention of "again" in the text was the last straw. But I needed to calm down and start planning. Later, I will have time to think about the likely breakup of my marriage. The following morning, I located and scheduled an appointment with a divorce lawyer. Then I approached my boss to request exemption from my assignment. I concocted a flimsy excuse for my absence and assured him I would compensate my replacement later. He hesitated and made a fuss about it, which was ridiculous considering I had covered for my colleagues numerous times in the past year. After his minor tantrum, he finally agreed to give me the next 10 days off. On Thursday morning, I said goodbye to Jenny, and instead of heading to the airport, I checked into the Residence Inn. I used my corporate credit card to rent a car, a clear breach of company policy. But at that point, I couldn't care less, and purchased everything I thought I'd require. On Friday, I met with the divorce lawyer to discuss my alternatives and the necessary steps for divorcing Jenny. It wasn't pleasant. Essentially, we would divide all our assets, and I might end up providing maintenance to her for up to 5 years. Jenny had a part-time job with minimal pay, though it came with discounts on her clothing purchases. She enjoyed dressing well. It had never been a big issue. The house was always in order. Dinner was on the table most evenings, and I earned a good income. Now her modest salary meant I would need to supplement her earnings until she could retrain for a new career. Wait a minute. Are you saying that she can betray our marriage and I still have to support her? The lawyer shrugged. Yes, that's how it works now with the changed laws. Adultery doesn't matter in divorce proceedings. I realize now how innocent I was, both about my wife and the law. So if I want to protect myself from being taken advantage of, what are my options? He grinned. Before I say anything else, write me a check for $500. Because what I'm about to tell you means we never had this conversation. And we won't meet again. I wrote the check and handed it to him. First, let me ask you two things. Do you enjoy your job? Any close family nearby? I hate my job, and my parents and sister moved to Florida, I replied. The man reclined in his chair. Then I'll continue, but let me make this clear. This isn't legal advice. This is just me telling you what I would do in your shoes. He paused briefly, as if carefully selecting his words. I'd disappear. Take what I could from the accounts and get out of town. It would be different if you had kids. I'd never advise abandoning them, especially with a promiscuous mother. But in your case, I'd say the world is vast. Take some time to explore it. His advice caught me off guard. I had to ask, why such an extreme solution? Wouldn't it be better to take my chances in court? You're asking the wrong lawyer that question. 4 years ago, I caught my wife with her personal trainer. I had it all on video, her and some muscled gym guy in our bed. They even mocked me on tape, calling me a cuckold. I divorced her, had one of the best divorce attorneys around, even better than me. And guess what? 4 years later, I'm still writing her a check every month, and I will be for another year. That's the reward you get for treating your wife like a queen and not making her earn her own keep while you're married. Let's face it, the system is rigged against guys like you and me. I left his office, shaking my head, but starting to form a plan. First things first, I needed to find out what Jenny was up to with our neighbors. The swingers party was scheduled for Saturday night, and if luck was on my side, it would be held at the Goods house. We had been there frequently enough for barbecues and pool parties, so I knew the layout well and anticipated being able to set up and observe the festivities. Just to be sure, I had hidden a tracking app on Jenny's phone. Saturday was a tedious day spent in a hotel room, waiting for her phone to indicate she was on the move. I didn't have to wait too long. By 5 p.m., Jenny had left her house and headed to the Goods. I drove to our neighborhood in my rental car and parked on the adjacent block. In the Goods' backyard, there was a small potting shed, and I managed to enter it without being seen by sneaking over their 6-foot fence. Over the next 2 hours, I used both a video camera and a camera to capture the events unfolding at the Goods' residence. Absolutely everything was captured on the video. Using a digital camera equipped with a telephoto lens, I focused on capturing complex details. The participants' faces were clearly outlined, leaving no doubt about their identity. However, the most difficult part was watching and recording my wife's performance. Jenny was undoubtedly the center of attention and the most visible figure at the party. While the other women present may have had attractive physiques, Jenny stood out from their background, which prompted many men to pay attention to her and spend time with her. The real pain I felt was watching Jenny, the woman I loved and dreamed of a future with, cheat on me with other men. I recorded a video recording of Jenny by the pool at Goods Hotel, where she cheated on me with Kyle Good and with Harry Thompson. The three of them finished and Jenny returned to the house. The patio doors were closed, but I could still see the lighted room where Jenny continued to cheat on me. The third guy knocked her down on the couch. After almost 2 hours of watching, I had footage showing the faces of all the participants in compromising situations. It's time to leave. While I was sitting in the car trying to calm down, I wanted to cry, but I restrained myself. I wanted to hurt Jenny and her friends, but I restrained myself. Instead, I went back to my hotel room, bought a bottle of Jack Daniels, and sat there wondering what to do next. I didn't get intoxicated. Instead, I stayed awake well past midnight, contemplating my life and the options my lawyer presented. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that apart from my marriage to a woman I adored until recently, my life was miserable. I despised my boss and my job. I detested living in the Midwest with its harsh winters. Even when temperatures rose above freezing, going outside meant battling mosquitoes carrying dangerous diseases like West Nile virus. I loathed the large house Jenny insisted on buying before we have children, with its expansive lawn that demanded constant watering, fertilizing, and bi-weekly mowing. I had few neighbors I cared about, and that number had just been halved. It was now certain that I would leave Jenny. I've heard there are men who can tolerate their wives' infidelities, and some who even derive pleasure from it. How, I can't imagine. It's just not for me. I attempted to sleep, a task made difficult by hours spent staring at the hotel room ceiling, wondering how I managed to mess things up so badly and why it had come to this. After completing my double major in German and Russian at the University of Minnesota, I was offered a job by the Army. Sign up for the next 4 years and I could start real work as a translator immediately after basic training, avoiding the grunt work that other options might entail. During my final year stationed at the Pentagon, I met Jenny. She worked as a waitress at the bar where my friends and I frequented. I'll admit what initially caught my attention were her pretty face, sweet smile, and great figure. We dated for 7 months before I proposed. Jenny said yes, and soon after my discharge, we married and settled in Minneapolis. Jenny's job options were limited. As much as I hate to admit it, intelligence wasn't her strong suit despite her other wonderful qualities. I couldn't bear the thought of her continuing to work at a bar, especially with all the attention she received from other guys when we were dating. Despite earning less money, Jenny found part-time work selling dresses. It wasn't a financial strain because my income was good enough that 4 years later, we were able to buy our dream house, even as housing prices had yet to fully recover from the crash. Our decision to move to Minneapolis was unexpectedly altered within 2 years. Dad opted for early retirement and joined Mom as snowbirds in sunny Florida after selling our home. My sister, never fond of Minnesota's cold winters, followed them there. I don't want to justify Jenny's actions, especially her involvement with the goods parties, but I believe Mom and Sis moving to Florida created a void in Jenny's life. This void may have influenced her growing attachment to our new neighbors, particularly Doris. When Jenny and I purchased our house, we planned a year to prepare before starting a family. Now, lying awake in this unfamiliar bed, I can't help but wonder what I would be doing a year from now, holding my newborn child instead. I woke up on Sunday morning feeling relieved that I hadn't overindulged in JD the night before, avoiding a hangover that would have compounded my already troubled state. There was a diner just across the street that offered a decent breakfast. I reviewed the checklist I had compiled, a few items I wanted to take if I left, and an inventory of our assets, including bank accounts, brokerage accounts, and so forth. The list of possessions I wished to keep was short, as most of our money had been invested in the house down payment. I spent a couple of hours back in the room sorting through the photos and videos from the previous night. It's astonishing how much detail these digital cameras capture, even in low light conditions. I separated out the better images. I decided to save the photos of the other participants for another time. In my mind, none of them were innocent. They must have known Jenny was there without her husband, which to me should have made her off limits. So, screw them. Monday marked the beginning of my exit strategy in earnest. Jenny wasn't expecting me back from my business trip until Friday. I had 4 days to get everything in order and try to handle it correctly. I visited the first of 5 local car dealerships in search of my next vehicle. After finding what I wanted at 2 of them, I completed the trade with the dealer who offered the best deal. I left the dealer's lot driving a used camper van that had been converted along with a $2,000 check, leaving behind my 1-year-old Chrysler 300. The dealer got the better end of the deal, but I was satisfied and now had a vehicle suitable for travel. I spent Tuesday and Wednesday organizing my finances and equipping the camper with everything necessary for an extended road trip. By Thursday, I was prepared, a whole day ahead of my deadline and one of the days Jenny worked at the store. Back at our home, I packed the van with the few items I needed, making sure not to overcrowd it. On the kitchen table, I left a note alongside 2 photographs, one of Jenny with Good and Thompson, and the other, our torn wedding photo. I considered leaving my wedding ring but decided I could sell it along the way for at least a tank of gas. The note simply said, "Jenny, I won't live with a liar and a cheat. Goodbye." My journey began in Naples, Florida, where my parents had settled after my father retired. Driving the van was a pleasure. I covered 12 hours a day on back roads, seeking out campgrounds to spend the night. I soon learned there are excellent campgrounds and not-so-great ones, crucial knowledge for my extended travels ahead. By the evening of the third day, I arrived at my parents' house. Mom greeted me warmly with a big hug, Dad with a more reserved one. They knew I was coming to visit but weren't aware of the details. It was going to be difficult. They both liked Jenny and were eagerly anticipating news of grandchildren. "George, what brings you here?" Mom asked. I didn't want to discuss it outside on the porch. Once inside, I had to ask, "Has Jenny tried to reach me?" Mom's expression turned solemn. "Why would she call? Doesn't she know you're here?" "She might be too ashamed to call, afraid to talk to either of you. I left Jenny. I caught her cheating on me." Mom was incredulous. "I can't believe it, not Jenny." "Please believe me, Mom. I don't want to show you the photos as proof. She got involved with our neighbors in a spouse-swapping group. Dad finally spoke up, and why? I have no idea. Once I found out, I decided to leave. I haven't spoken to Jenny, and I don't plan to." "Are you two getting divorced?" "That's the thing, Dad. I consulted a lawyer and realized how badly I'd get screwed in court. I'd be paying alimony to her for years, while she's out having fun with the neighbors. I took the easy way out. Quit my job, bought a van, and I'm hitting the road for a while." "That's not like you, son." "No, it's not. But maybe it's time for a change. I finished college in 3 years, went straight into the Army for 4, got a job right after, got married, and spent the last 5 years trying to build a future to raise kids with the woman I loved. So here I am, 30 years old. No children, no spouse, driving a 4-year-old van, and about $6,000 to my name. Quite a situation, huh?" Mom chimed in. "Isn't there a way to forgive Jenny and reconcile with her? What if she apologizes and promises never to repeat it?" I felt sorry for Mom. She was always the optimist, always willing to forgive, always seeing the best in people. I hugged her. "No, Mom. You didn't see what I saw. Her with multiple guys. You didn't hear her pretend to miss me while planning a gathering with the neighbors and their friends when she thought I was away on a business trip. The lies were almost as painful as the cheating. Both shattered any trust I had in her." Around 7 o'clock, my sister Gina arrived at our parents' house. It was great to see my younger sister again. Despite being 5 years apart, we were close until I went off to college. Whenever I returned during breaks, we always made time to catch up. But after I joined the Army, it became harder to maintain that bond. Tonight I realized how much I missed her and how she had grown up. We strolled along the beach after sunset, the sky ablaze in brilliant red hues. With our parents absent, we could speak openly. "Jenny called me last night. She mentioned you had left, suddenly, just leaving a note." "Did she say what the note said or why I left?" "No. She only asked me to tell you to call her if I heard from you. So, big brother, what's going on?" "Jenny secretly cheated on me at a party at our neighbor's house. Presumably, I was on a business trip. At this time, she arranged to attend a party. I have a video recording confirming that she is with 5 different guys." I think Gina was shocked by what I revealed. "No way! Did you hire a private investigator?" "No. I stayed in town because I had a hunch something would happen. I saw a text on her phone. I booked a hotel nearby and filmed the party myself. They weren't very careful. Once I had the evidence, I quit my job, bought the van, and left Minneapolis. Now I'm planning to travel for a while, starting with the States and maybe Europe if I can afford it." "What about Jenny? Are you going to divorce her?" "As I told Mom and Dad, divorce would financially ruin me. It's not happening. I'm just leaving everything behind." "Well, would you consider taking your little sister along? I have a few weeks of vacation coming up and would love to spend it on the road with you if that's okay. Gina, this isn't about replacing Jenny. It's about sorting myself out. I understand. Anyway, if you're heading west, I'd like to join for a couple of weeks. I hear Utah is stunning. Deal. We'll aim for fall when it's quieter and cooler. Right now, I need a big favor from you. I need your computer expertise. Gina was one of those rare women who defied the odds to become an expert programmer. What do you need, big brother? I informed Gina about the videos and photos I possessed from Jenny's party, outlining my plans for them. As I detailed my revenge, Gina's smile widened until she burst into laughter. You got it, big brother. I can make that happen. It took several weeks to organize everything and ensure our actions couldn't be traced back to us. 3 weeks after leaving Minnesota, everything was ready. Gina's computer skills amazed me. Initially, Gina and her boyfriend Dennis identified and gathered personal details of nearly all the attendees of Good's parties, except one couple. Within 2 days, they sent phishing emails to each participant, containing links that, when clicked, installed a virus. This gave Gina access to the contacts of all these marks, how we referred to the swingers, including their email addresses, a valuable resource. Kyle Good, who owned the local John Deere dealership, became our primary target. Gina and Dennis successfully hacked into the dealership's business computer and retrieved customer email addresses and physical locations. A website was created hosted by a Ukrainian company specializing in amateur adult films. When I asked how we did it without being tracked, Gina and Dennis just grinned. They explained that the web hosting was paid in bitcoins, seriously, and the routing went through so many levels that it would require CIA-level skills to track it. I nodded in agreement when they explained, although it still didn't quite add up. I decided to trust their experience. Harry Thompson remained a mystery. We were unable to access his computer or find out a lot of personal information about him. He wasn't on social media like Facebook or LinkedIn. There was no information about his email address on the Good family's computer, and we were unable to determine his employment status. Dennis suggested that Harry might be involved in something illegal, and in the end, we gave up on any further attempts to dig into his past. Gina and Dennis had a friend, a video editing specialist, who created a fascinating film based on videos and photographs. The finished video was then uploaded to the website and made public. The next section may upset some people and disappoint others. When editing the video, I decided not to include the scene where Jenny meets Kyle and Harry at the same time. However, we left out the moment when she meets one of the other men. This decision was aimed at demonstrating her participation in the group's activities without causing her unnecessary embarrassment. Many people asked why I didn't reveal Jenny completely and show all her actions. My answer is simple. Jenny's parents, Robert and Linda Rawlings, they were incredibly kind to me, treated me like a family member. If they ever see or hear about this video, they deserve more than to witness their daughter behaving like this, despite her attitude towards me. Thus, although the video confirmed Jenny's involvement, it omitted her more compromising moments. One sunny morning in Florida, Gina visited our parents' house where I was staying. Sitting at the kitchen table with her usual black coffee, she asked the crucial question. Everything is ready, big brother. The website is running, emails are queued, and we have prepared hundreds of emails for Good customers without using email. Are you ready to move? It's time to act. Yes, Gina, the time has come. Let's get started and enjoy life. Gina took out her phone and instructed, Dennis, please send the emails. She glanced at me and added, a mutual friend is flying to Vegas today. He'll mail the letters once he lands so they can't be traced back here. I think we've covered our tracks as best we can. Thank you, Gina, for everything. I'm leaving tomorrow to start my journey. Gina handed me a credit card. Dennis also suggested something else. He proposed that I apply for a credit card in my name for situations where you can't use cash. Many state and national campgrounds require reservations secured by a credit card. It's in my name, but if you use it and I don't report any charges to the bank, it won't raise any red flags. This way, your transactions can't be traced through your card. The credit limit is $5,000. You can reimburse me whenever it's convenient." I hugged Gina tightly. This was more than I expected. "Thank you, and please thank Dennis for me too. Don't forget. You promised we'd travel together soon." "Like I said, it's too busy and hot at the Utah National Parks right now. Let's plan to meet up in late September and visit some of those parks." After agreeing to spend 2 weeks in September together, Gina left for work and I prepared the van for travel. The next morning, I said goodbye to Mom with a kiss and gave Dad a hug, thanking them for letting me stay and promising to stay safe and keep in touch. As I backed out of the driveway, my father surprised me by leaning in through the van's open window. "I love you, son." I always knew he loved me, but he had never said it before. Tears welled up in my eyes as I drove away. I traveled north to Virginia using the back roads, then onto the Blue Ridge Parkway, spending a week exploring southwest into North Carolina. From there, I headed north to Nashville, where I enjoyed 2 days on Broadway, listening to fantastic music. Continuing my journey, I fulfilled a long-standing desire to visit the National Monument at Shiloh, stemming from a junior high report on Western battles of the Civil War. Next, I headed west with plans to stop in Memphis, hoping to experience Beale Street and perhaps visit Graceland. One night, while parked in my van along State Route 64 east of Bolivar, Tennessee, I was awakened in the middle of the night by a pounding on the door. A state patrol officer greeted me, his hand resting on his service sidearm, holster unbuckled. "Can I assist you, officer?" "How long have you been parked here?" "I arrived around 10 last night, too exhausted to continue driving, so I decided to get some sleep." "May I see your driver's license, please?" After handing over my license, he returned to his patrol car to verify my information. As I waited, unease crept in. His demeanor suggested something more sour. "Norsorio Becker sour. Were you aware there's an outstanding warrant for your arrest?" "No, I wasn't." "Can you tell me what it's for?" "I didn't get the details. It's a misdemeanor warrant. Any reason someone would be looking for you in Minnesota?" I briefly explained the situation to him. Then, with a wry smile, I added, "I suppose a judge awarded my wife maintenance, and I haven't kept up with payments." The officer smiled. "I could arrest you, but right now I have to catch up with that car that just sped by. I suspect the driver is drunk, so that's my priority over your warrant. You can wait here until I get back, or since we're only 30 minutes from the state line, you can head south on Highway 18 and leave my jurisdiction. Do you understand what I'm getting at?" I didn't see any speeding cars, so I figured he let me go easily. Maybe he had his own problems. I nodded. "Yes, officer." "You're not going to turn this against me, are you?" "Officer, you can ask anyone, even my future ex-wife. I'd rather do something terrible with my hand than betray the one who helped me." "You're probably right-handed, aren't you?" "Well, I'll do terrible things to my right hand if anyone ever hears that I've betrayed you. I suggest you cross the border as soon as possible." With that, he headed west, and I headed south to Mississippi. Since I missed Beale Street, the charm of New Orleans and Bourbon Street beckoned me, and I continued south. 3 days of drinking and listening to jazz, Zydeco, and Creole music have pretty much ruined my wallet. I pawned my gold wedding ring, bought a full tank of gasoline, 2 bottles of Dixie beer, and a hefty portion of a toughie before heading west. I needed to stay away from big cities and related expenses until I ran out of money. I still had a few thousand left, but I was spending it too fast. I chatted with some fellow travelers and picked up tips from them on how to cut down expenses while adapting to my new lifestyle. One valuable lesson was discovering how economical it could be to dry camp on BLM, Bureau of Land Management, land. Another couple I met suggested I visit Big Bend National Park, describing it as a paradise. With no fixed destination and no one expecting my arrival, I decided to head to Big Bend. I was sitting at the bar of the Starlight Theater Steakhouse in Terlingua, just outside the boundary of the park, listening to a group of Australians at a nearby table banter with each other. Perhaps I was paying too much attention to their conversation, trying to decipher their accent, when the largest one among them, a towering figure at 6'6" and at least 250 pounds, got up from their table and stood beside me. "It's not polite to eavesdrop on conversations, mate," he said. Maybe I was feeling a bit cheeky, because my response could have easily gotten me into trouble. "I wouldn't call it eavesdropping, since I can barely understand half of what you lot are saying with that funny accent of yours," I replied. The big man seemed surprised. "Well, aren't you a cheeky Yank? What makes you think our accent is funny and not your own?" "Well, we're in a Texas bar, so your accent stands out as unusual here. If we were in a Brisbane bar, it'd be mine. And since you're guests in my country, let me buy you a beer." Any tension dissolved with my refusal to be intimidated, and especially with my offer of a drink. The big man introduced himself. "I'm John. The beer is a Foster's, and you're welcome to join our table." "I'm George, and I'd be glad to," I said. It had been a while since I'd socialized much, not since Florida. Even though I only caught about half of what was said, unless someone kindly translated into English for me. I had the best time I'd had in months. These folks knew how to have a good time and hold their liquor. Even the ladies drank me under the table. There were 8 of them traveling together, spending 4 weeks in the U.S., starting in Dallas. They ended up inviting me to join their camping group. It seemed some were couples. James and Sarah were married, while others had more casual arrangements. Despite being the odd one out, I decided this was too good an opportunity to pass up and spent the next 2 weeks with them. After leaving Texas, our caravan traveled to Roswell, New Mexico. The Australians were eager to visit the birthplace of UFO hysteria. It turned out to be somewhat disappointing, but at least we could now say we'd been there and tick it off our respective bucket lists. White Sands Monument was fascinating. Despite the men's desire to head west to Tombstone, they were all fans of the Kurt Russell Val Kilmer movie, the women's votes won out. "It's probably just another tourist trap," they argued, so instead, we headed north into Colorado. I stayed out of the debate and was simply happy to be with this cheerful group. The Colorado Rockies left me speechless. I hadn't expected such breathtaking beauty. Having grown up in the Midwest, I had spent all my time east of the Rockies. The Australians and I spent our final week together crisscrossing the state before parting ways in Breckenridge. They headed back to Texas, while I continued on to Grand Junction, where Gina would soon join me. We spent our final evening hopping from bar to bar along Main Street before I bid goodnight, promising to visit Australia someday. As I strolled back to my van, Mary approached from behind and linked her arm with mine. "Can I stay with you tonight?" I was pleasantly surprised but hesitant. I didn't want to provoke any conflict with my newfound friends or be the one who interfered with another man's relationship. "What about John? Won't he mind if you spend the night with me?" John's eyeing that blonde American girl with the enhancements. Looks like he's set on spending the night with her. John and I have a blast together, but we're not exclusive. Mary's proposition was tempting. I've never had a one-night stand. I'm more of an old-fashioned guy who prefers commitment before intimacy. "Does that mean you won't sleep with me?" I looked at Mary, deciding to end my dry spell. "Hell no. Come with me." I put my arm around Mary's waist and led her into the van. We drove back to the RV campground while Mary boosted my ego, confessing she had been hoping for this since we met. "The other girls will be jealous. We all think you're cute and special." After parking the van, we quickly started kissing. It's been a few months since I was last close to Jenny, but it didn't ruin the evening in any way. It was an amazing intimacy. After finishing, we kissed until Mary said it was time to go to bed. The next morning, Mary was dressed and sitting on the bed, holding my hand. When she saw that I was awake, she kissed me. Goodbye, George. Don't let what happened to this woman affect your future relationship. There are many good, loyal women in the world. You're a wonderful man, and you'll find someone like that. I couldn't resist asking, could it be you? No, I'm afraid not. It wouldn't have worked out for us. I'd be too far away from my family, and you'd be too far away from yours. I've been listening to you for the last 2 weeks. You are close to your sister and parents. I would not want to separate you from them. And no grandmother would want to live half a world away from her grandchildren. Mary was right, of course. I was grateful that the first woman I had intimacy with, after Jenny, turned out to be wiser and more practical than me. Well, I had to ask. Thank you for last night. You'll never know how much it meant to me. I think so. It meant a lot to me, too. Take care of yourself, George. Enjoy walking with your sister. Mary kissed me and got out of the van. All the other Australians stopped by my place before leaving that morning. I was particularly happy to receive a warm handshake and hug from John. He grinned widely and reminded me of my promise to visit someday. As I drove towards Grand Junction, I felt content. Hanging from the rearview mirror was the necklace Mary had left earlier that day. In the ashtray, there was a note. This is for Gina. Please convey to your sister that I regret not being able to meet her, and that her brother is a true gentleman and a wonderful person. With love, Mary. It was a simple shell necklace that Mary always wore, and the note meant everything to me. Gina and I were hiking through Arches National Park heading towards the Delicate Arch when we encountered another hiker. Abby Ross was hiking solo. She stands about 5'7" with an athletic build. Her long black hair, naturally glossy, complemented her dark skin and deep eyes. She passed us on the trail, exchanging quick greetings. After she moved ahead, Gina nudged me in the ribs when she noticed me admiring her figure. What? I protested innocently. Gina just smiled knowingly. You men are all the same. I see a woman with a killer body and you turn into jello. Oh, and you think women are any different? I saw you practically drooling over that tall guy at the airport baggage claim. I almost took a picture to show Dennis how you behave when he's not around. Oh my God, don't you dare. Okay, I looked, but I would never touch. I've been faithful to Dennis since day one. Sounds serious with him. As serious as it gets. I think he's going to propose when I'm back in Florida. He really wanted to come on this trip but couldn't get away. I was genuinely happy for my sister. She deserved someone like Dennis. When we reached the summit, I was glad to see Abby sitting there, capturing photos of the arch. Gina did me a solid by introducing herself while I hung back, preparing lunch. Their conversation seemed friendly, and by the time I finished setting up, Gina brought Abby over and introduced us. Abby, meet my brother George. George, this is Abby Ross. I convinced her to join us for lunch. We enjoyed eating together, sharing stories, and hiking as a group. When Gina discovered Abby hadn't arranged a campsite, she insisted Abby join us at our site in Devil's Garden. Despite Abby's objections, Gina was adamant. The three of us spent the evening sharing a meal and enjoying the starry night around the campfire. That's how our friendship with Abby Ross from Klamath Falls, Oregon began. Abby accompanied us on hikes through Arches and Canyonlands National Parks and later joined us at Goblin State Park. Abby, a recent graduate and waitress from Klamath Falls, had been planning this trip with her boyfriend until he left her for someone else just weeks before. Feeling lonely, Abby decided to venture out alone, but was grateful to join Gina and me. I didn't realize how much I needed company. Thank you both for letting me tag along. After our time at Goblin, Abby had to return home, but we promised to stay in touch. Gina and I parted ways with Abby before heading to Bryce Canyon. During the drive, Gina brought up the topic. So, what do you think of Abby, big brother? She's a pretty great girl, right? She's wonderful, I replied, but I didn't sense any romantic interest from her. What are you getting at? I noticed her looking at you more than once in a way that seemed more than friendly. Give her some time. She might be ready for romance. We didn't discuss Abby further that week, but as I dropped Gina off at the airport, she raised the subject again. You should give her a call, George. Maybe go visit her in Klamath Falls. I bet she'd say yes. All right, I conceded. I'll call her. Say hi to Mom and Dad for me and give Dennis my regards. Let me know when you land. I returned to my van and pulled out the map. It was 1,000 miles if I opted for the scenic route, much of it along US 50 through Nevada, known as the loneliest highway in America. The name seemed fitting. I savored the solitude, especially after 2 weeks with the Australians and the following 2 weeks with Gina. It provided ample time for reflection. By the time I reached Reno, I had made a decision and called Abby. She sounded delighted to hear from me and readily agreed to my offer of company. Abby had to work for the next 2 days, but then she would have 3 days off. So I took my time and arrived on the morning of her first day off. During those 3 days, Abby and I explored the southwest corner of Oregon, from Crater Lake all the way to Ashland, where we enjoyed Shakespeare's comedy, As You Like It, performed in a replica of the Globe Theater. It had been an incredible 3 days, though the van was cramped and nothing romantic happened beyond holding hands. I had hoped for more, but it was clear Abby wasn't ready for that kind of relationship. Nevertheless, it was enjoyable. When I dropped her off on Thursday, I promised to visit Klamath Falls again after my next stop, Glacier National Park. With late October upon us, I needed to head up there soon, as winter was approaching, especially at higher elevations. It was during my time at Glacier that I received a response to one of my job inquiries. I had contacted a former commanding officer who offered me a contract to provide translation services at the Paris embassy. This was an exciting opportunity, and I had 3 weeks to catch a flight to Paris. That afternoon, I departed Glacier. I spent 2 days with Abby, who managed to swap shifts with 2 other waitstaff members. During that time, we deepened our acquaintance. Though we did share kisses and hugs, nothing more occurred. Drawing comparisons between women is always perilous. Jenny could linger in bed for hours. On weekends, she might sip her second cup of coffee and flip through magazines like Vanity Fair or Cosmopolitan before considering rising. By that time, I would have already finished breakfast and my morning tasks. Abby, however, eagerly embraced each day. By 10 o'clock, we could already be 8 miles along a trail or halfway up a mountain peak. Another notable contrast was their reading habits. Jenny rarely had a book in her hands, whereas Abby not only read books but delved into literature. She was the first woman I dated who had already immersed herself in The Brothers Karamazov, Anna Karenina, and War and Peace. The more time I spent with Abby, the more I realized we had similar perspectives on nearly everything I found significant. Equally crucial for a lasting relationship, I found myself captivated by her physical beauty. I hoped that her former live-in boyfriend wouldn't see the light and attempt to rekindle their romance while I was abroad. My feelings for Abby were growing stronger, and I confessed this to her. However, with my upcoming year abroad, I failed to clarify the nature of our relationship properly, a foolish oversight on my part. Despite this, we made plans for her to visit me in Paris. I drove non-stop to Naples, pausing at rest stops along the way for my usual 6 hours of sleep. Sticking to the highways allowed me to arrive at my parents' home, exhausted but content in just 4 days. Surprisingly, I encountered no difficulties with paperwork or visas, suggesting something had changed back in Minnesota. The charges against me had been dropped. I was no longer a fugitive. 10 days after reaching Florida, I bid farewell to my parents and sister, then boarded the plane to Paris. I met Simone Pirot in Paris. She was 25, and she didn't look like any woman I'd ever known before. My parents would have called her bohemian. When we first slept together, I felt awkward. She was petite, almost boyish, with a slender French figure. But as soon as she dragged me into bed, all doubts about her femininity were completely dispelled. This was love with a capital letter. Simone maneuvered my body like a gymnast on a projectile, doing the seemingly impossible. Every time I thought we had reached the limit, she would suggest something new. When we weren't close, we often went to cafes with her bohemian friends, smoked Gauloise and sipped absinthe. We were arguing about Camus, Beauvoir, and Sartre. Simone's parents hoped to name the boy after their idol Jean-Paul Sartre. When the girl was born, they decided to name her after Sartre's longtime friend. As I delved deeper into Sartre's reasoning about Stalin's actions in the Soviet Union, my admiration for him decreased, and my reverence for Camus grew. Simone and I often argued about this, but the passionate reconciliation afterwards made the arguments almost worthwhile. It was a delightful experience. I felt like I had stepped into the early 20th century Paris of Ernest Hemingway. I never imagined I would fall for Simone. Our political and value differences were too stark. We spent 4 months together before she left Paris with another couple heading for Cap d'Agde on the Mediterranean. I missed the physical intimacy, but not the philosophical debates that often wore thin. Our split probably came at the right time, as I had been delaying Abby's visit for a month. Knowing how hard it would be for a waitress to afford the plane fare, I sent Abby the tickets. She was due to arrive in mid-May. Contrary to the song, May turned out to be much more pleasant than April. I wasn't prepared for my reaction when I picked Abby up from de Gaulle. As she walked towards me, my deep affection for her surged. She put down her travel bag to embrace me with a kiss, holding my face in her hands until we realized we were in public. It was a very French moment. Back at my apartment, I suggested Abby take a nap after her red-eye flight from O'Hare. That evening, we planned to celebrate her arrival. I went to work for a few hours and returned to a wonderful surprise. Abby had clearly gone shopping for city clothes. I had only ever seen her in outdoor gear before. Now she stood before me in a perfectly fitting skirt, sweater, stylish leather jacket, and high heels. The look on my face said it all. Did you enjoy it? It was amazing. Let me freshen up and change into something suitable to be with such a beautiful woman. It was a magical first evening. Paris seemed to embrace Abby warmly. And that night, Abby and I shared our first intimate experience together. Over the next 5 days, I took Abby to all the iconic sites of Paris. We visited the Louvre and Musée d'Orsay, Notre Dame, Shakespeare and Coimbra bookstore, and the top of the Eiffel Tower, ticking off at least 8 attractions from Abby's must-see list. On the 6th day, we boarded a high-speed train and spent 3.5 hours traveling to Grenoble. When I shared my plans with Abby, she objected that she hadn't packed suitable hiking gear or clothes. She continued to object when I took her to an outdoor store to get outfitted with essentials. Her objections persisted until I convinced her it was a belated Christmas and early birthday gift. Despite lingering snow in the higher altitudes, we hiked on alpine trails whenever possible. 3 days later, we departed for Paris and continued ticking off Abby's must-dos in the city. Everything went smoothly until our final evening, when we stopped by a cozy cafe for a nightcap before heading back to my apartment. That's when things took a turn. A group of Simone's friends who knew about Simone and my past relationship spotted Abby and me entering and insisted we join them. Abby and I eventually split up. She engaged in conversation with 2 of the women while I talked with the men. As we prepared to leave, I could sense the tension in Abby's expression. "When were you planning to inform me about Simone?" I wasn't going to. It was a brief relationship with a woman before we became involved. Now that we're together, I want to commit to being exclusive with you. I promise not to see anyone else while we're committed like this. Abby wasn't reassured. I thought we were together. When you left Klamath Falls last November, you said you loved me. I thought that meant something. I said I was falling in love with you, and it did mean something. We should have clarified what that meant. Abby began to cry. I feel so foolish. She went into the bedroom and started packing for her flight, another red eye. Coming out with tears in her eyes, she said, "I'll take a cab to the airport." "Let me drive you." "No, I just need to be alone right now. I'm sorry this had to happen on our last night. I've had such a great time with you, but now I feel like I'm just filling in until Simone returns to Paris. That's not true. Maybe not, but that's how it feels, and I need time to think this through. Call me and we'll talk. It might be a while before we can talk. I leave for Moscow tomorrow for important negotiations. Communication will be limited because of the nature of those talks. Let me at least take you to the airport. No, just call me when you can. Abby reached up, pulling me down for a kiss. I love you, George Baker. Without another word, she left, and just before the door closed, I told her, I love you too, Abby Ross. I was right. Over the next 2 weeks in Moscow, communication was brief, restricted to family. When I returned to Paris, my first tense phone call to Abby showed we needed to talk soon before things fell apart. Unfortunately, I soon had to return to Moscow as agreements from our first talks were collapsing. Talk about bad timing. Abby wasn't resentful, in fact, she tried to tell me she understood, but we needed that conversation soon, before things got worse. Gina, Dennis, Mom, and Dad came to visit in July. One of the great perks of being stationed in Paris was how easy it was to persuade people to come and stay for a while. Quite a contrast to some of my previous Army duty stations. During their visit, Gina shared some good news. Jenny had contacted her to explain why I was no longer considered a fugitive. Jenny had found tenants for our old house who were interested in buying it. The proceeds from the sale would cover the mortgage and any money owed to Jenny. If I signed papers relinquishing any claim to the house, Jenny would consider everything settled. Furthermore, Jenny had initiated divorce proceedings, citing abandonment, so we would be legally divorced by next June without requiring any further action from me. Gina had the necessary paperwork. I signed it and mailed it back to Jenny. Our time in Paris was mostly enjoyable, except for whenever Gina would give me a hard time about letting Abby go, in her words. Gina, I'm not trying to. I'll sort everything out when I return to the States, I promise. Damn, you're such a fool, big brother. Do you really think a woman with as much going for her, beauty, personality, and brains, will waste time pining over you? She had a point, but for the next few months all I could do was Skype with Abby and write love letters. Upon returning to the United States, my first destination was Klamath Falls. Abby welcomed me warmly and went out of her way to make me feel like we were a couple once more. However, a significant issue arose. I needed employment, and the only offer I received on the West Coast was from a tech company in Los Angeles. Abby prioritized proximity to her family, while my specialty demanded opportunities not available in Klamath Falls. Although we would finally be on the same continent, we'd still be 700 miles apart. Over the following months, we managed to spend at least one weekend together each month, alternating between Klamath Falls and Los Angeles. In May, we took a 2-week leave. My boss complained but approved the unpaid time off, for love's sake, to camp and hike through Joshua Tree, Kings Canyon, and Death Valley. Our compatibility and love were undeniable. Yet I struggled with committing to marriage, likely due to my own insecurities and past trust issues. Previous relationships had left me hesitant. Jenny didn't leave me but couldn't stay faithful. Simone ended things with me, not the other way around. Abby professed her love but wasn't willing to leave her family for California. Despite the challenges, Abby and I continued to see each other whenever possible. I remained faithful and believed she did too. I persevered, searching for a solution that would bring us closer together. Sometimes life surprises you with unexpected twists and turns, like unexpected pitches in baseball, some easy to hit out of the park. That July, I experienced 2 such surprises. First, a prestigious New York publishing house contacted me and offered an incredible opportunity, translating Joseph Stalin's personal papers and letters from Russian to English for an upcoming book. They had previously been translated by a Russian, but the publisher wanted a second, unbiased translation. The best part? I could work on it remotely, even from Klamath Falls. Then, less than a week after signing the contract with the publisher, something even more improbable occurred. 2 years and 2 months after leaving my home in Minnesota, I was rudely awakened at 7 in the morning by a knock on my door. I groggily answered, only to find Jenny standing there. "Hi, George." Not the greeting I expected after all this time. I glanced down instinctively, but she wasn't holding a gun, just a manila envelope. "Can I come in, George?" I stepped aside, letting her in. "Should I make coffee?" "That would be nice. I left my hotel without breakfast this morning." I decided to be civil. "I'll scramble some eggs." "I didn't come for breakfast, George. I came to deliver these." Jenny handed me the envelope. "Our divorce was finalized 2 months ago. I used abandonment as the reason." Glancing through the papers quickly, I replied, "You could have mailed these. There's nothing for me to sign." Jenny began to lose control. Her voice grew louder. "I wanted to give them to you personally. I didn't want to act cowardly like you. I wanted to look into your eyes and make you understand how much I despised you for leaving me that way, without a word, just a note. And I wanted a wife who wasn't sleeping around with a bunch of jerks." Jenny collapsed onto the sofa, sobbing. But I couldn't stop myself from speaking further. "You don't know how much it hurt me to see you with Good and those other idiots." Between sobs, Jenny managed to apologize. "I'm sorry." "Me too. I thought we were in love and ready to start a family. I was ready to have our children, but then that Doris woman started coming over for coffee. She filled my head with all sorts of nonsense. She said that once you realized what you were missing, you'd join their group. That was never going to happen. I meant it when we exchanged vows, forsaking all others. And I meant it every time I said you were the only woman for me." Jenny lowered her head, staring at the floor. Intrigued, I couldn't resist asking her, "So what happened after I left? Did you stay with the band?" "No, I've never done that. I've barely spoken to Doris more than a couple of times since I found your note when I got home. And those few times were only when I couldn't avoid meeting her. Besides, your little surprise turned everything around." Jenny noticed the look in my eyes at the mention of your little bomb. "Oh, George, don't pretend you didn't post these videos and photos and send anonymous emails to half of Minneapolis. Everyone suspected it was you, but no one had any proof." "It was you. I didn't think about it at the time, but later realized that I had left that picture of you, Kyle, and Harry on the dining room table. If anyone saw this, they would have proof that I was behind the creation of the site. I burned the photo 10 minutes after I found it. I couldn't bear to see evidence of my reckless behavior in our house, and even if I hadn't destroyed it, I would never have shared it with anyone else. I couldn't betray you again." "And what happened next?" "Well, first of all, Kyle Good lost his John Deere dealership. It turned out that in his contract with Deere there was a clause about public standards. Who would have thought that the progressive people of Minnesota would be so outraged by the Good family's parties? When people stopped shopping there, the Deere left, leaving Kyle to sell cheap Chinese tractors and all sorts of junk. The store went bankrupt. Kyle was mired in debt, and Doris left him for Harry." "Are you serious?" I found some satisfaction in this twist of fate, but Jenny wasn't done yet. "Kyle ended it on his own, with a gun." "Did Doris end up happily ever after with Kyle's best friend?" Jenny shook her head. "No, as it turns out, Harry had anger issues. He ended up putting Doris in the hospital, which landed him in prison. He's looking at least 8 years behind bars." 8 years for assaulting a woman? What exactly happened? Well, it wasn't just that. When the police raided his place, they found he was dealing oxy. He got a year for assaulting Doris and 10 for distributing illegal substances. Things were getting more interesting. I couldn't help but chuckle. Jenny went on. 2 of the other couples moved away. Obviously, the school board was not too pleased that elementary school teachers were involved in the scandal. What about you, Jenny? Well, besides completely messing up my personal life and driving away the man I loved, my career turned out okay. No one really cared about a dress salesperson's personal life. I changed my appearance, cut and dyed my hair, and most people didn't recognize me from those videos. Some did, though, and I had to deal with fallout from time to time. I went full-time at work, took evening classes at community college, got my AA degree, and now I manage a Banana Republic store in St. Louis Park. Good for you. And I meant it. Time had indeed mellowed me out. Jenny started to tear up. Do you think there's a chance for us, George? I might have softened over time, but my mind hadn't turned to mush. No, I'm sorry, Jenny. That's not going to happen. Trust has completely evaporated. Seeing you with those people destroyed it. And we both know a marriage without trust isn't a happy one. I expected you to say that, George, but I had to ask. When I saw you and heard your voice again, I remembered what I lost. So I had to try one more time. I'm sorry, George. With that, Jenny began to cry. Damn, I used to love this woman with all my heart. Later that evening, Jenny and I had dinner together. During dinner, I couldn't help but ask, why, Jenny? I thought we had a good marriage. Why did you let Doris talk you into it? George, I was always the good girl, never one to do anything remotely wild. You were only the second man in my life. Doris preyed on my innocence. She convinced me it was just a matter of time before you would join in the fun. She made it sound like there was something wrong with you for resisting, like it was your perversion, not ours. It was never going to happen, Jenny. The vow of forsaking all others meant everything to me. Jenny nodded as if agreeing with me before finishing her explanation. Doris gave me Kristen McCallum's book because he's watching. It told about a married couple in which the husband liked to watch his wife with other men. Doris also introduced me to thematic sites on the internet. The more I immersed myself in reading and watching, the easier it became for Doris and Kyle to persuade me to attend my first party. I became the center of attention, the queen of the ball, which flattered my ego. Soon they convinced me to go to the second party, where you found me. I walked Jenny back to the hotel. I felt that she was hoping that I would ask her to stay the night, but I resisted. Of course, I could have slept with her and left. But that would have been wrong, for many reasons, not least because of my obligations to Abby. The next morning, I woke up and checked the time. It was only 7 o'clock and Jenny's flight wasn't scheduled until 11. There was plenty of time to pick her up and drive her to LAX. It was another opportunity to spend a few hours with the woman I hoped to spend my life with. Instead of rushing, I decided to sit down and have a cup of coffee. Something had been bothering me since 3 a.m., keeping me awake for hours. Now it all made sense. The previous night with Jenny felt like a cleansing of all the emotional baggage I had been carrying. My soul felt lighter now. I realized how crucial it was to close that chapter of my life with Jenny, to begin a new one with Abby. After showering and packing the car, I locked up the apartment. With any luck, I could cover the 700 miles and reach Klamath Falls before Abby finished her shift that night. I decided to call Abby, hoping it wasn't too early for someone who worked late. She must have seen my name on her phone because her voice sounded sleepy when she answered. Hi, George. Good morning, Abby. I'm sorry to wake you, but I was wondering if I could pick you up from work tonight. Why? Where are you? I'm just leaving Thousand Oaks. I should arrive by 11. Is something wrong? No. I just really need a couple of days with you. If you can spare some time, maybe we could go for a short hike and talk. Sure. I'll switch shifts with Janet for tomorrow. Are you sure you should be driving all day? I'll be fine. I'll see you at 11. I was 200 miles north when I realized I was heading to propose without a ring. I stopped at Ben Bridge in Sacramento browsing diamond rings until a display of sapphires caught my eye. One ring stood out, and to the surprise of the sales lady, I approached. A sapphire? Yes, that one. A non-traditional choice for a non-traditional lady? It's perfect. Please box it up, no need to wrap it. The sales lady smiled. She'll love it. What about sizing? Let's hope she says yes, then we'll figure out the size. After putting the ring in a beautiful blue box and running my credit card, she said, Thank you. Good luck, but I can tell she'd be foolish to say no. Back on I-5, heading north, I called Gina while driving, putting her on speaker to avoid a ticket. Sis, today's the day. I'm on my way to see Abby with a ring in my pocket and all the hope in the world in my heart. Gina practically screamed. Good for you, George. What do you think? Will she say yes? Gina laughed. Ask her nicely and she'll be your fiancée before you finish, will you? I wish I had your confidence. Wish me luck, sis. Gina was almost right. I pulled up to the pub's front door at 11:05 and Abby came out to the car. I opened the door, knelt with the box in hand, but before I could ask will, she was in my arms, saying yes while kissing me on the lips, cheeks, nose, and forehead. I guess I'm getting married again. We spent the following 2 days visiting her parents, hiking in the mountains, and enjoying each other's company. Abby was particularly thrilled to hear about my new contract. Seriously, George, I get to marry you and live here. That's when it struck me that Abby had accepted my marriage proposal without discussing our living situation. With my new contract, however, it became irrelevant. We could build our life together, raise children, and have the support of her parents. It was the best of both worlds. 2 days later, I was back on the road, heading to LA to deliver bad news to my boss. Arriving home, I found a note on my door. George, I had some time this morning before my flight, so I wanted to stop by and apologize once more for betraying your trust. I'm not sure if we'll ever see or talk to each other again, but I want you to know I realize my actions, influenced by bad advice from Kyle and Doris, were immature and selfish. It's why we're not married today, why we won't have the children we dreamed of. I will always love and miss you. By the way, I understand now that you spared me some pain with the video. I know you must have recorded me with those other men in compromising situations, and I will forever be ashamed of that. I believe you did it out of mercy, for my sake and maybe for my parents. Whatever your reasons, I am grateful for your kindness. You are a good man. Jenny. That was the last I heard from Jenny. In October, a lovely season in the Northwest, Abby and I had a modest wedding in Klamath Falls. Mom, Dad, Gina, and Dennis attended the ceremony. 2 of my Army buddies also made it. That completed the Baker party. Abby's side of the venue was bustling with friends from high school, college, family, and colleagues. We enjoyed an open bar, hors d'oeuvres, a live band, and a dance floor. It was a fantastic celebration. Abby and I remained until the final guest departed. Our honeymoon was a departure from our usual routine. Instead of spending the week hiking through forests or deserts, we opted for a full week on the beaches of the Virgin Islands. Each morning, Abby would rise early to run several miles along the beach and swim a few more miles in the ocean. However, every morning after returning to our cabin and showering, she would pull me back to bed to reaffirm our wedding vows. The translation of the Stalin Papers established my reputation as the go-to English translator of Russian literature. This allowed me to earn a comfortable living sufficient to support my growing family while working from home. Occasionally, I had to travel to meet with authors or publishers, but it never exceeded 3 or 4 weeks a year. A year after our first son, George Adam, or G.A., was born, Abby's mother passed away from cancer. Her decline was swift, too swift for Abby. But at least she lived to meet her grandson and didn't suffer long. It appeared that Mom Ross had been the linchpin holding the family together. Within the following year, Abby's brother and sister-in-law relocated to Tucson to be closer to her family. Abby's father, weary of the cold, moved to the Mexican Baja near Ensenada. Suddenly, there was little reason for us to remain in Oregon. It was Abby who broached the subject. I think it would be nice to live closer to your parents and Gina. They could spend more time with G.A. We sold our home in Klamath Falls and moved to Naples. 9 months later, Gina Abby was born. Mom and Dad were overjoyed, so was I.